welcome everybody. Lovely to see you, and especially lovely to be able to see Sondra, which many of us haven't been able to do now for quite some time. And just in case you're unaware of who Sondra is, she's the Director of Christian Friends of Israel Communities and has been for over 20 years now, isn't it, Sondra?
Yeah, 23 years, more than 23 years, yes.
Yes. And just a wonderful spokesperson for the lovely residents of Judea, Samaria, the heartland of Israel, which is very important for Israel to declare sovereignty over, which we're all hoping would have happened by now, but still being worked on. So Sondra, without further ado, I might just hand over to you, but I perhaps better ask everyone to mute in case there's any background noise coming through while Sondra talks. There will be time for question and answers, so get ready with those for when Sondra has finished speaking, and I'll wind up after that. Bless you all.
Okay. Thank you, Joy, and thank you, all of you, for joining us. This is actually, as you know, the beginning of a series. I've been doing a lot of Zoom teaching over this past year and a half. I keep saying, thank God for Zoom. You know, when we're in these impossible situations and we can't travel like we used to, going back and forth. All you guys used to come to Israel, and I used to go to Australia and to other parts of the world. And that's really been halted. I did start traveling again to the United States. I went in May, and I'm actually leaving again this Saturday night for a trip to the States. Canada is still out of bounds. Australia is out of bounds. Let's hope that, you know, some of these places loosen up soon, but Zoom has just been an amazing, amazing vehicle that we are going to continue using, because, you know, what we've discovered is that even when I travel abroad, I go to one country, one area, once a year, once in 2 years. Here with Zoom, we can see each other once a month or whenever it is, and that really is special. So what we did here is, you know, thanks to Joy and her amazing energy, we launching now a new series, hopefully once a month, always on a Tuesday. The time will always be based on Queensland time. So if you're not in Queensland, the time is going to change. Okay, if you're in Queensland, it will be at 7 p.m. In the evening. And we will hopefully get that right as clocks change in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. We hope to continue to inform you as the updated time where you are. And it's going to always be some kind of an update from Israel and some kind of a Bible teaching. Okay, and so this is the first one. It is recorded. So anyone who registers for this, whether you're here on live now or have registered separately, will get a recording of this. And you, of course, you feel free to pass it on to anybody you know. It would be wonderful if we can get more people on board and hearing these messages that we're putting out from Israel. Okay, so what am I going to talk about? Thank God, nothing. We're not in any crisis right now. But, you know, I think it's a good time for us to step back and evaluate our government, the Israeli government. Now, I had given a talk right when the government was formed, and I think some of you heard that, and that was a number of months ago. Now, this is no secret. This is a government that nobody thinks is ideal. Nobody, okay? Because what it required was for parties from the right and parties from the left to come together and form one government. And what created that problem was the fact that even though the majority of the country is right-wing and the majority of the members of Knesset are right-wing, Benjamin Netanyahu became, to many, a person that they could no longer work with. And that happened for a lot of reasons. There were people who never liked him. There were his opponents on the left. So the fact that they refused to have anything to do with him is really not new. although I would say the depth of their antipathy towards him reached all-time highs. There are people who he is actually now on trial for corruption in a number of different situations. And so there are people that believe that he is indeed corrupt, and therefore, regardless of their point of view, whether they're right or left, don't want somebody to be the prime minister who is who is now standing trial for so many levels of corruption. Of course, there are others who are saying, let's wait and see what the court decides after all the evidence has been presented. Let's see if he really is corrupt. And that has become a debate in Israel, not only about Netanyahu, but in general. Should a prime minister who is charged with corruption be allowed to continue serving in office? Okay. Or should we wait until there's a final decision? And there's two sides to the story, really. One side says, like I see one of you, I think, Judy, you put that in, innocent till proven guilty. It's not just innocent till proven guilty, but if you have politically motivated people, for example, in the prosecuting office, who, look, they can't create charges from nothing. But if you have suspicions, that requires interpretation. And so the question is, how do you read the evidence? Does the evidence mean, I would say most people would agree that there were things Netanyahu did that wasn't a good thing to do. But that's not the question. The question is it criminal? Okay. And here it's a question of interpretation. So if you're saying a person has to step down from being prime minister because he's charged with a crime, what you're essentially doing is giving a little too much power to the prosecution to change what is ostensibly the will of the public who has voted this man into office. On the other hand, somebody who is charged and you're starting to hear the evidence piling up in court, okay, it doesn't look so good, and it makes people very uncomfortable to feel that this is the man who has all these charges against him. It's not just charges, you have evidence, you have people who are testifying, not just the prosecuting office, but all these various people who are testifying. It's an uncomfortable situation to feel, oh my goodness, this is the person who has such heavy accusations against him. Do I want this person to lead us, to be our representative to the nations and lead the government? So, I see both sides of this, and I'm certainly not coming to decide on that. Okay, but that's the background. And also, Netanyahu, unfortunately, had a very problematic leadership style, particularly within his own party. And every single time, this has been going on for many years already, every single time there was someone in his party who was becoming very popular, he would push him aside. Okay, so instead of grooming heirs, he did the opposite. Anybody who had talents, who had leadership style, he pushed them away. So some of the parties, in fact, the right-wing parties that are today in the current government, party led by Gideon Sa'ar and the party led by Naftali Bennett, both of those parties are essentially people who were in the Likud, okay, and who were very talented, and Netanyahu saw them as threats and pushed them aside, and not only pushed them aside, but treated them, in some cases, especially Naftali Bennett, treated them abominably, and therefore created enemies as opposed to allies. Okay, so, and this is the background. So we had 4 elections, and these elections were not, could not, even though, as I said, the majority of the people in the government, majority of the Knesset were right-wing people, too many refused to be in any government with Netanyahu. Both of those right-wing parties that I mentioned, in addition to some of the other parties that are center parties, such as Kahol Lavan, Yesh Atid, these are parties that would have been very happy to align with the Likud, and even have a Likud prime minister who would lead the government in a primarily right-wing direction with certain compromises with the centrist party, but they were not willing to do this under Netanyahu. Had the Likud at that point, if Netanyahu would have resigned and anybody else from the Likud would have been the head of the Likud, we would today have a Likud-led government, okay? So that's the background. What we've had now is a controversial government because on the one side, we have far left, we have Meretz, which is a far left party, and we have even further to the left in some ways, although further to the right in other ways, is the Arab Party. There's an Arab Party, which is called Ra'am. It's a very interesting Arab Party. They've split from the United Arab Party, which is actually a combination of a few Arab parties. They split. On issues of religion, they are very conservative. In other words, there's common ground between them with the most religious parties, because things having to do with, respect for faith, or more conservative values. For example, between them and Meretz, they have tremendous disagreement on things having to do with gay rights, gay marriage. Okay, this is a party that is very conservative in those kinds of things, and they're very against gay marriage. And yet they're very often partnered with Meretz, which is a far left party, who is not just far left on issues having to do with Arabs and Jews and two-state solution and all that sort of stuff, but they're also very far left in things having to do with family values and religious values and things like that. So anyway, we have those two parties. We have on the right, we have Bennett, we have Yamina, and we have Gidon Saar's party, Tikva Chadasha. And then in the middle, we have Yair Lapid, who's actually the largest party in this coalition, okay? And he's really a centrist. For example, he believes ultimately a good solution for Israel is a two-state solution. On the other hand, he thinks that's a solution that is absolutely not workable today, because he blames the Arabs. He says, no, they're not interested in peace. Okay, so this is a person that at least right now we can work with. Okay, even though I'll say one day if the Arabs come and say, we love you, we want peace, all these things happen. Okay, he might then say, okay, now I'll do a two-state solution. At that point, we're going to disagree. But today we are both reading the reality in a similar way. Okay, the Arabs are not interested in peace. They're not interested. These aren't people we can trust, and so forth. Right now we have common ground. So the question has come up: can this government function? Can this government function? And that's still a question mark. I have to tell you, I'm asking the questions now, and I don't really have good answers. What the basis of this government has been that there are issues like two-state solution, which you see being supported by those two left-wing parties, versus the two right-wing parties that are saying not just anti-two-state solution, they're in favor of sovereignty. They're in favor of annexation of at least Area C. What to do with the rest, let's wait and see. But both of those parties are to the right of the Likud. Okay, the Likud and Netanyahu formally accepted a two-state solution. The Likud, even though Netanyahu and Trump reached an understanding and they had this whole plan of the century, which would have allowed Israel to annex, at least, or start the process to annex parts of Area C, Netanyahu didn't do it. Whereas Bennett and Saar are to the right of Netanyahu and said, no, you need to start annexing now. Okay, so you have these two extremes. So what this government has agreed is that we're not doing either of these things. We are not going to move towards a two-state solution, but we're not going to move towards sovereignty either, because we can't agree on those issues. And therefore, what they are agreeing, first of all, this country has not had a budget. Okay, we've been operating without a budget because there was so much fighting in the government. They now have a budget. It is now in the process of the debates that are going on. It's anticipated that the budget will pass shortly. Okay, that will create financial stability for this country, which is very needed. Dealing with COVID, okay, there's really not a whole lot of difference. You hear a lot of political infighting between the opposition and this current government, where the opposition, particularly Netanyahu, are finding every possible excuse to, talk about how the current government is so terrible. And they're also talking about COVID. The truth of the matter is the policy of this current government is not very different at all from the policy of the last government, because there's a very broad consensus in Israel about how to deal with COVID. Okay, we are a very pro-vaccine country. As a result of the vaccines, we do not want to go to quarantines anymore. Okay, and so the quarantine option is severely limited, if at all. And we're trying to negotiate our way through COVID with various measures. And as I said, I know that people here disagree or agree with how Israel is doing it, but within Israel, the population is really quite united. So sometimes it's actually very humorous when you hear Netanyahu yelling and screaming about how Bennett is handling the COVID, and you sit back as just an ordinary person in the audience and you're saying, now, wait a second, this is exactly how it was handled by you, And so the differences are so minor that most people don't even understand what the argument about. And so it's clear that what is happening, and it happened to a certain degree also when Netanyahu was prime minister, and there were people in the opposition then, they were yelling about how he handled COVID. And it was very clear that what they were doing is turning COVID into a political issue where it really didn't belong there. Okay, this is being handled very differently. So that's the issue of COVID. Now, one of the things that has been very interesting and happened last night was Yuli Edelstein, who is one of the senior members of the Likud party, very, very popular. The Likud party has something called primaries, which are like internal party elections to determine who is the head of the party. That's one type of election. And another election is to determine the order of the members of Knesset. The way elections work in Israel is that you vote for a party, you don't vote for an individual. I know many systems have particular districts, like I know in Great Britain, I think Australia is probably a similar system, where you've divided the whole country into districts. And so when you vote in an election, you're voting for an individual who is running against the other party or whatever in your district. In Israel, we don't vote like that. We vote, it's a little bit of a crazy system, but it is the system. We vote for the party. It's a national election. I think one of the problems is we're such a tiny country. If we divided the country into districts, we would have, a city block, and that would be a district or something, So everyone votes for a party. And so the party itself presents its list. And the order of the list determines the order in which you get into the Knesset. So, for example, there are 120 people in the Knesset. If a party gets 30 seats, it's the first 30 in that list that get into the Knesset. So therefore, the order of that list is very significant. And in the Likud, because it is a big party, the way they determine the order of that list is they have these primaries. So Yuli Edelstein has come out always number one, number two. He's always one of the most popular people among Likud members. And Likud members is, something like 150,000 people. It's not just the members of Knesset. It's anyone who wants to join the Likud. And and so he's a very important guy. Last night, he kind of launched a bombshell when he announced that he is going to be challenging Netanyahu in primaries for the leadership of the Likud. Now, he wants primaries to happen right away. Netanyahu is trying to push off the primaries as late as possible, because Netanyahu realizes, and if you listen to Netanyahu when he gets up in the Knesset and yells at the government, that's one kind of Netanyahu. But if you look at what's going on within the Likud party today, it is a very divided, fractious party, okay? Because most of the people in the Likud, even those who, when they get on television or whatever, they say, we love Bibi and we only want Bibi, even they realize that the reason their party is in so much trouble is because of Bibi. They also realize that the reason their party gets so many votes is because of Bibi, okay? So Bibi is the problem, and Bibi is also part of their strength. But practically what has happened, and I think more and more people in the Likud realize this, that because Bibi is the head of the Likud, it has prevented a right-wing government from taking place. And it has brought in a government where we have Meretz and the Arab party, Ra'am, in the government. And this is an impossible situation for anyone, either a center or right. This is not the kind of situation that anybody favors. And so he came out and he says he will challenge Netanyahu. He believes he will win. And he feels it is vital for the Likud to replace Netanyahu, because if somebody else is at the head of the Likud, the whole right wing will get a lot of votes and they will have a right wing party. And you know what? He's right. What may happen if Bibi is not in the running, two things can happen. It could be that the Likud will get less votes, but the right wing bloc will get more. It's possible that if Bibi is not in the running, there are people who say, you know what, if already the Likud is not headed by Bibi, so I might as well vote for Gideon Sa'ar, or I might as well vote for Bennett, okay? Because there are a lot of people who liked, for example, both of those parties, but felt that they needed to vote for the bigger party, okay? Or they like Bibi, they think he's most capable, even though they prefer the ideology of Sa'ar and Bennett. So you have a lot of mixing between the parties, but within the right-wing bloc. So that's something that can happen. What also can happen is there are people that left the Likud because they didn't like Bibi and went to Sar, and Bennett will go back to the Likud. It's also possible that Sar will rejoin the Likud, okay, because his party is really a breakoff from the Likud. So there's also, by the way, members of Knesset in the centrist party who also left the Likud because they couldn't stand Netanyahu. So there could be a lot of shifting going on once Netanyahu is not on the scene and he's not the head of the Likud. Okay, so this is something that could very well happen. But the very fact we've been hearing about this kind of tension within the Likud now since the last elections, a little bit even in the previous elections, but certainly since the last elections, it is also anticipated that Nir Barkat, who's the former mayor of Jerusalem and now is a member of Knesset in the Likud, it's anticipated that he too will put in his hat in the race and vote and run in this challenge to Bibi. If there is a three-way challenge, of course, that will strengthen Bibi. So if the two of them, Yuli Edelstein and Nir Barkat, can join forces, they will have a much better chance of getting rid of Bibi. Okay, so that's something that just happened last night. Now let's take a look, and with this, I'm going to shortly come to a close on this part of our talk. I want to take a look at some of the things that has happened in this government. When people say, for example, there's a lot of people from the opposition on the right who accuse this government of being a completely left-wing government. Let's see, is that the case? Okay, so there have been some very interesting decisions that have been taken recently. One is there was a new community established in Samaria called Evyatar. This was one of many types of so-called illegal outposts, places where communities are started. Now, there are quite a number of communities that have already been in existence for 5, 10, even 15 years. And if you would go into the communities, they look like normal communities. They have houses. Some of them have still a lot of caravans, but many of them have houses, and people live there. Maybe not hundreds of families, but certainly dozens of families live in these places. Some of them are actually neighborhoods of long-standing established communities. These younger communities or pioneering communities have been in line for full legalization for years, and Netanyahu has promised every election that he will complete the process to legalize these communities, and every single time he doesn't. Okay? One of the things, of course, that Bennett had promised was that he was going to legalize this. Now he's in a situation in a government where he has half his government, or let's say a third of his government, that won't hear of this. Against that background, there's a group of people started a new community that doesn't even exist. They put up a few caravans, a couple tents, nothing built, nothing. They called it Evyatar, and they said, we want to start a new community. Now, what's interesting about this location is that the land is public land. There's no claims here that some Arab owns the land or it might be owned by an Arab. So legally, it makes the situation of that community much easier. But what was astounding was that this government voted to approve this new community. This is the first time a new community was approved for establishment in Judea and Samaria in 15, 20 years. This is an amazing accomplishment. Now, the compromise was that it would begin with a school, with a yeshiva. And there'll be none of the buildings, the families that moved in there, they all moved out, but the buildings remain. And those buildings will be used now to establish a yeshiva, a Bible school, okay? Now, and then the government promised that it will begin the process of legalization. It has not been legalized yet, okay? We're now in a process. It's too early to tell whether Evyatar will remain an empty promise of this government, or indeed it will lead to something more concrete, in which case it will have created an accomplishment that we have not seen throughout the years of Netanyahu being prime minister. So this is something we want to keep our eyes on, and it's something that's very, very positive. On the other side, we have the coalition, the Arab party, Ram, who was promised as part of the coalition agreements extensive funding. What is the funding for? So part of the funding is to establish or legalize communities, Arab communities and Bedouin communities in the Negev. Now, this is a very interesting subject. I have read intensively discussions, legal discussions, all kinds of discussions on all sides of this. And I have to tell you, when I come out of this, I scratch my head and I said, I don't know who to believe. Okay, For a long time, there has been, and there's quite a consensus about this, the need to legalize more communities for the Bedouin in the Negev. Many of the Bedouin actually resisting attempts that have been made in the past to move them to cities, move them to towns, to move them into communities that we would say modern communities. They resist that. They want to retain their traditional ways, and they're living in these encampments. But Israel has said those are not legal places, and so they do not provide proper electricity and proper schooling. And so this has been a struggle between the Bedouin community in the Negev and the state of Israel going back at least 50 years, okay? So previous governments, left and right governments have all agreed this has to be figured out, this has to be legalized, this has to be agreed. They had a number of plans. Each time something went wrong and the plan didn't go through. So there are those people who say the current plan is a very good one. It does not give up land in the Negev that wasn't supposed to be given up anyway. And what the advantage is that now that Ra'am is part of the government, we have an Arab party that is partnering with us to make sure it happens. We have Bedouins there that it's going to work. And at the end of the day, it is in our interest to ensure that these Bedouins have a normal way of life so that we're not fueling the crime and the terrorism that is coming out of these communities because young people have nothing to do and they're not getting a proper education, etc. So this is, on the other hand, there are people saying, no. There are areas in the Negev that this should have been preserved for nature, for military bases, for Jewish communities, and have been given up. And as I said, I'm reading discussions on both sides from people I trust, from people who have all the right values, and I am confused. So I don't have a clear answer. And again, that's something we have to see. We have to see what happens. Is this going to be settled, and will we have a much better situation with the Arab community or not? One of the things that has been a big priority of this government, which to some extent was continuing the priority of the last government and to some extent taking it further, and that is an attempt to deal with soaring rates of Arab crime in Arab cities. And we all agree that this is a problem that has been ignored by the police for way too long, because the attitude was, okay, it's in the Arab world, they're dealing with it on their own selves, we don't want to get involved, it's too difficult, and let them kill each other. I mean, I don't want to say that it sounds very bad, but this has been like too hard for us to put our head into this. And now people realize that, number one, there are many, many Arabs who are upstanding, fine, loyal citizens of Israel. And they may not be Zionists, but they're also not looking to attack Israel in any way. And they are saying it's not fair. We are citizens and we're not getting the kind of protection that is being given to citizens in other parts of Israel, in the Jewish towns. And they're absolutely right. Okay. So now there is a whole new division that was established in the police, headed up by an Arab policeman who has been a very, very, shall we say, a very loyal Arab Israeli citizen. He has worked his way up through the police. He's considered a very competent officer, and he is taking this on. And what's interesting is, since he was appointed to this position, his house has been shot at, his car has been shot at, he and his family have been threatened. So there is, what we're seeing now is a lot of tension within the Arab community between those people who are in favor of cooperating with the government of Israel and being upstanding citizens the way they would anywhere else, and who are beginning to appreciate how wonderful a life they have in Israel as opposed to the kind of life they would have in other countries in the Middle East. Tensions between them and tensions between others who are anti-Israel, anti-law and order. And in some cases, it has nothing to do with ideology. It has everything to do with crime. We have, Arab families that are very involved in organized crime, like anywhere else. It's kind of like the United States was fighting the Italian mafia, in the early part of the 20th century. For a long time, they also said, oh, we can't deal with this. And some of the politicians were on the take and all. And at some point, they realized, if we don't deal with this, it is going to ruin our entire society. And so we're seeing that going on. Now, again, it's too early to say if any of this will be a success. At the end of the day, when we look at this Arab party, Mansour Abbas, we have to ask ourselves, who is he really? Okay. on the one hand, he's a fundamentalist Muslim. On the other hand, he's made some wonderful statements about how he believes that he's against violence, and he believes that he's an Israeli citizen, and he has to believe it's very important for the Arabs to be integrated into Israeli society. And he agrees to put on hold any ideology he has about a Palestinian state. So that all sounds good. On the other hand, there was a member of his party whose name is something, I forgot his name. Here it is, Said El-Harumi. He recently died. He died of a heart attack. He was a very young man. He died suddenly, unexpectedly. Okay, and just talking about how people talked about him. On the one hand, there were people saying, oh, he's a very fine gentleman, and he was a person you could have a civilized conversation with, and you could agree to disagree, and then work together on the things you agreed with. And yet, on the other hand, there was a protest rally not too long ago in Jaffa, where Arabs were protesting the fact that the people, the local terrorists who were rioting and destroying property and harming people in Jaffa, Arabs against the Jews who lived in Jaffa, that was going on in May, they were protesting the fact that these people were arrested and that were coming to trial. I mean, and you look at a guy like this, and you look at a party like this, and you say, well, what's going on here? What do they really believe? What do they really think? And so I have to leave that with a huge question mark. And I want to just end this part of my talk with one very clear statement. One of the things that I think was very upsetting to so many of us over the past 2 years with all these election campaigns, whether you were on the right or the left or the center, was the level of discourse. The right accusing the left and the left accusing the right, and people saying nasty things and huge rallies against Netanyahu, which whether or not I agreed with them or didn't agree with them, I couldn't stand the level of conversation, the way they were talking on the one hand, but on the other hand, they were reflecting a very, very serious anger, an anger that is very dangerous in any society. If you have that kind of anger right there under the surface or above the surface, it's a very unhealthy thing. One of the things we're seeing today is that this anger is reduced, okay? The discourse in the country is much calmer. Because this current government is made up from right and left and center, people feel that they are represented in some way in this government. Where we're not seeing kind discourse is in the Knesset. Now, I realize every parliament all over the world, opposition yells at each other, calls the government names, and the government calls the opposition names. And I know in England, they sometimes throw shoes at each other. And, these are things that you see, okay? But there are some lines that I think shouldn't be crossed. And I am very, very disturbed at some of this language that goes back and forth. And I have to say, particularly, I see it coming more from the opposition to the government than in the opposite direction. And this is the kind of thing that I think has to stop. And I think most of us feel the same way. I think we see this kind of problems in other countries, argue about it, talk about how terrible it is, bring your economic charge, bring your political charge, be fiery in your ideology. Don't call someone a Nazi. Don't say that they're hateful. Don't accuse someone who's right-wing of being an anti-Zionist and a left-wing. Come on, be realistic, okay? And so that's just what I want to say on this issue. And I know I've spoken a long time. I do want to, and I want to open this up for question and answers, but I just want to, before I finish, I want to bring in a bit of a Bible thought that is actually very related to what I was talking about now. I gave you a long, I hope not too confusing update, but I think at the end of the day, what all of us have been experiencing, and I think not only in Israel, but all over the world, is we are all experiencing today a crisis of leadership. And one of the problems with leadership, on the one hand, we are in democracies. The people are the leaders, okay? It's the people that are able to elect their leaders and determine who their leaders are. And I think it's very good, and I'm sure you all agree with me, that we are not under totalitarian governments or dictators, kings and queens that were able to have their sons or whatever daughters be monarchs with absolute and total authority to do whatever they want without having to answer to anybody. So democracy is a very good thing. And democracy works very well so long as people have confidence in the democratic system and have confidence in their leaders. And that doesn't mean you don't agree. I mean, there's always been situations where, I didn't vote for that guy and he's awful, and you'll disagree with his policies, but you have a sense that he is a legitimate leader, okay? And he acts as a legitimate leader. And that is something that has been very, very problematic. And I think we're seeing that in other countries, not just in Israel, where it's one thing to criticize the policies of a government, it's another thing to say he has no legitimacy being where he is, okay? And when I look at this issue of leadership, and I'm remembering two things in the Bible. So first of all, in Deuteronomy 17, we have for the first time God giving commandments having to do with a king. And until this point, we don't know anything about a king. Okay, I mean, there are kings in other nations, but we don't know that there will be a king in Israel. And actually, it's not clear as to whether a king is the preferred method of government in the Bible, because what God says here in Deuteronomy 17, verse 14, when you enter the land that the Lord your God has assigned you, taken possession of it, settled it, okay? If at that point you shall say, okay, I would like a king over me, as do all the other nations, then you shall appoint a king. Okay, and then the scripture continues on with certain things that are requirements of the king and ways he needs to behave. So there's an ongoing discussion. Is this, if you say you want a king, you're allowed to have a king, but it's not ideal? Or is God saying, yeah, it's an ideal thing? And I don't know, you can decide either way. Jury's out on that one. But what I want to focus on is what are the requirements of a king? So one of the requirements has to be from your brother. In other words, it can't be a stranger, not an occupier, not an emperor from somewhere else. It needs to be someone from amongst you, from your society, from your nation. So he's now different than you. He's from you, okay? Which, he calls it here a king, but in many cases, I think this is very much reflecting a democratic value. One of the people who is appointed, elected, whatever, he's just like the rest of us. He's not special. And then it says he shouldn't have many horses, and he shouldn't have many wives, and he shouldn't have a lot of money, a lot of gold and silver. Okay, what's the purpose of these things? If I translate it to modern days, a king should not be taken up with all kinds of material possessions. He should not be about, I have all this power. I therefore have the ability to ensure that I have the most money, and I have the most weapons, and I have the most women. Today we don't marry women, but we know this. How many politicians around the world in recent years have been disgraced because they're keeping a mistress, they're having an affair, they raped somebody, they molested somebody. Where's this coming from? These coming from these men in power who think that because they're in power, they have more power than anybody else, and they can use that power to take advantage of people or to accumulate property in a way that is absolutely not right. And so what God is really saying here is that a king is somebody who is a leader. He is not a tyrant. He doesn't have absolute power. And then it goes on in the continuation, it says that a king needs to write himself a Torah scroll, and he needs to read it. He needs to have it with him. And why? Verse 20, in order to prevent him from acting haughtily towards his fellow, or to deviate from the instruction from the Torah, either to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. A king has to always realize that God is above him and that he is duty bound to lead his people in accordance with what God wants. So that's one pattern. Another, I am now started just recently teaching Joshua, where we've just completed chapter 1, and some of you I know are part of that. And in chapter 1, we have a very interesting discussion about leadership skills and what is expected of Joshua. And then several times in that first chapter, we have God saying to Joshua, just be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. and this, of course, encouraging him in his leadership. But if we look at it very carefully, we'll see that when God speaks to Joshua, he's saying he doesn't just say, be strong and courageous. He said, be strong and courageous to observe faithfully all of the Torah that my servant Moses commanded to you. Do not deviate it from it to the right or to the left. Very similar, by the way, as the instructions we read in Deuteronomy about the instruction to the king. Do not deviate to the right or to the left. It's the same kind of expression. And it goes on to say, if you do that, only then will you prosper in your undertakings, and only then will you be successful. Okay? So that, on the one hand, this importance of a leader obeying God and realizing he's not the issue. It's not about him. It's not about his ego. It's not about his power. It's about him putting himself in a situation where he can do the right thing, okay? And do the right thing to ensure the success of the nation. At the end of chapter 1 in Joshua, we have a separate discussion where the two tribes, Reuben and Gad, are basically challenging the authority of Joshua, or not challenging and questioning it. They're basically saying to him, yeah, we're going to follow you, Joshua, but we're going to follow you in the same way we followed Moses. For as long as God is with you, the way he was with Moses, okay? And there is an implication here that authority has to be earned, okay? People, and it doesn't matter if it's a king, a tyrant, or a democratically elected leader, it's the same for everyone. If you are a leader, you have to earn your authority. And if you lose the confidence of the people that you are there to govern, you will fail. And if I I think all of us would agree, it would be wonderful if all the leaders of Israel and all the members of Knesset were men of faith and men who feel very, very obligated to follow the Torah. There are some like that, not enough. And we have some leaders in the Knesset who are very faithful people, but when they come to positions of power, they don't withstand the temptations the power brings their way, and so they even if they are men or women of faith, they sometimes go in directions that are not honorable and are not ethical because the power gets to them. Okay, and I think what we have seen, I talked about Netanyahu, and my criticism of him really came from this issue. I think he's an amazingly talented man with most of his ideology 100% in the right place. He dealt with amazing challenges that I don't know if there was anyone in Israel that could have dealt with them to the extent he has and as talented as he has. But I think what we saw in Netanyahu is that towards the last years of his office, he let the power and the riches and all these other material issues get to him, swayed him from the values that initially informed him and became the basis of what he's doing. And I think that's very sad. And I think as we look at our new government today, there are people there with the right values. Now, not everybody observes all the commandments, and we don't have God speaking from the heavens directly to our leaders today. The way he spoke directly to Joshua makes it a lot harder, okay? But we do expect our leaders to be ethical people who care about the nation and put the needs of the nation ahead of their own ego. And of course, that is something I think all of us are dealing with all over the world. And it would be good if our leaders would read these passages at the beginning of Joshua and in Deuteronomy, especially Deuteronomy 17, where it's all spelled out there. And that is, of course, what we are hoping and what we would like to see. And I think us as members of democracies, when we vote for leaders, we need to be looking for two things. We need to be looking for their capabilities, their talents, their education, all those things. But at the same time, it's good to look at to what extent they will really and truly put the needs of their people before their own personal needs. Okay. Anyway, I'd like to open this up for Q&A. I spoke way too long.
Can I
unmute yourselves.
Can I just say, Sondra, that was absolutely amazing, though. I don't think any of us have had such a detailed overview of the government like you gave us in such a short amount of time too. And your Knesset is certainly no different than our parliaments, I can tell you.
Okay.
So yes, I perhaps should have asked people to put their hands up to know who might want to ask a question. But just unmute yourself and go for it now. I do have one then while people are thinking about that. We're getting a lot of concerns that there's a lot of illegal Arab building going on in Area C, and your government or the police or the civil authority are doing nothing about it. Is this true, Sondra?
It is true. And in fact, I wrote about that in the newsletter I put out last week. So if you're looking for that, I would recommend you go on our website. It's a huge problem, and unfortunately a problem that it's not being taken care of today, and was not being taken care of in the last 2 years under Netanyahu as well. And this is just one example of the frustration that people and I feel when we have governments where in their ideology would demand that they would act here. And here, I'll tell you, there's two issues going on here in Area C. One is that certainly for people like us who believe Area C for sure has to be under, annexed or Israel needs to apply sovereignty in Area C, we certainly are against anything that would undermine Israeli authority in that area. But under the Oslo Accords that were signed by the Arabs themselves, which is international law, okay, they are forbidden. They are forbidden to build in Area C unless Israel gives them permission. Yeah. They are completely allowed to build in areas A and B, which is a large part of the area, plenty of room for them to build. What's happening now is the Palestinian Authority has a plan to build an Area C in areas that cut off the access between communities. So that we would want to expand communities, let's say 2 smaller communities, and have them grow towards one another and turn into a town or a city. Okay, that's where they're putting their building, right in the middle there, to cut it off. Now, this is something that, similar to the way Israel has handled or mishandled the Bedouin violations, building and other violations in the Negev, okay, which is part of sovereign state of Israel, Israel is also not dealing with these issues in Area C. So that's a terrible issue of the extent to which Israel is acting on its sovereignty or acting on its legal jurisdiction. The second issue, though, in Area C is that it is all being funded by the European Union.
Yeah.
So this is a gross interference by a foreign country in the internal workings of Israel. And I think that the necessity for Israel to stand against them goes way beyond how you feel about the two-state solution. Because every Israeli member of Knesset and every Israeli government member, right or left, should feel equally that Israel needs to decide what's good for Israel, and the European Union has no business pouring money into something and establishing illegal communities, illegal structures. And so I agree, this is a huge failing, and again, one that has been written about extensively in Israel, and there is pressure being brought on the government to take care of this. And I'd like to see what happens. It's one of those things that we are keeping track of this government. At this point, we are not happy. I can't say we were happy before either. I can say that there's been no change, and I would like to see there be change because it's a hugely important issue.
Well, we would all say, woe to Europe. Woe to Europe. It is most grievous. John Lockwood had a question.
Hi, Sondra. Good to see you again.
Hi, John.
Yeah, been a while. I'm now down the bottom of Tasmania, the southern tip of Australia.
Wow.
So you can come and stay down here as well when you come next time, if you never get back into this country.
Well, I'm eagerly waiting to get back into your country, and then I would love to go to Tasmania.
Fantastic. I was just put in the chat about your thoughts of Naftali Bennett. I've met him a couple of times, and I would have hoped that Benjamin would have green lighted him through, but he hasn't. What are your thoughts on him as a leader?
Okay, I have always liked Naftali Bennett. I met him personally. I knew him personally before he became so famous. He was the head of the Esha Council, which is the Council of the Jewish Communities of Judea and Samaria. That is where he was in high tech. He worked for Prime Minister for Netanyahu, and after he left Netanyahu's office, this is what he did. And so he's clearly on our side. He did wonderful things with the Esha Council at that point, and it was in that context. He actually was in my office. I said, Naftali, I want to tell you about CFOIC. I think we can cooperate. He was very in favor. I met with him in his office in Jerusalem. He met with me here in Carnation One in my office. He sat right here across from my desk. So those were, that was a long time ago, but, I admired him tremendously then, and I admire him tremendously now. I think he has a lot of capability. I am not sure that he's ready to be prime minister yet. In other words, I'm very happy. I agree. I totally trust his ideological stance. Okay, and I know that he has his heart and his values are in the right place, and he's going to have to make compromises because of the nature of this government. But I know that I trust his values. What I don't know is if he is mature enough politically to be fulfilling the role he is filling now. I hope he succeeds, though. I really do. And I think he and his partner, Ayelet Shaked, who the two of them have been running the party, very talented and educated and capable people. Let's see what happens if he manages to pull this off. But personally, I trust him.
All right. So we keep on praying for him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyone else? Just go for it. Unmute yourself.
Well, I see Kath. Kath is raising her hand.
Hi. Yeah, hi. Thank you for that, Sondra. Just a question about the COVID and the third round of vaccines. I've had reports come through to me that through various that there's a lot of negative reaction to a third round, and people are over it. And what is happening over there?
Well, what I'm hearing here is that there are people getting reactions to the third vaccine. I had all three vaccines and I didn't have a single reaction to any of them.
You're tough.
What?
You're tough.
And my friends were very similar. I do know some people, like someone who works here in the office, felt a little yucky, the night of the vaccine. By the next morning, she was fine. So we're hearing that kind of reactions where you feel yucky for like a day and then you're fine. Similar to the way many people react to a flu shot. I know when I had my flu shot a year ago, that's how I reacted. I had no reaction to the COVID, but I had that reaction to the flu shot. So we are hearing that. We're not hearing any really serious reactions. We know there have been a couple things reported, but really very few. Of things. What we are hearing now, though, is, and this is an issue that is of great concern, in children who are not being vaccinated, we are hearing of a syndrome called PIMS, where there's a young teenager who died of this week. It's people who had been sick with COVID. Not people who were vaccinated. They were not vaccinated. They were sick with COVID. And after they recovered from COVID, even a few months later, they developed this very serious syndrome called PIMS, which it's mostly in children and teenagers, and it brings them to a total collapse of their entire system and even death. So, these are the kinds of things we're hearing. And, I'm not, it's known I am in favor of the vaccines, but it's not a conversation I want to get involved with. But I would recommend one caution, be careful who you're listening to, because social media, unfortunately, is full of all kinds of people.
That's right.
Go to people you recommend, that you trust, go to your personal doctor, look up your local epidemiologist, expert in your city, and find out what they have to say and question them. Bring all the information that you're gaining and put it before the expert and see what they have to say. I can't possibly respond to any of this because I have absolutely no medical knowledge whatsoever. I just have anecdotal.
No, well, nor do I. It was just, just the stuff that comes through.
Right.
Yeah, no, thank you.
You sound as if you have a lot of political knowledge, though, Sondra, and we think you probably should be running for the Knesset.
No.
We would vote for you.
Now, I'll tell you something. First of all, the people tell me this, okay? But you see, if you look carefully at the political system, and it's not just here, it's anywhere, okay? Once you're in a political system, you have to toe the line with your party, okay? I am never going to be in a place where I toe anybody's line but my own.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I think, and I appreciate compromise. And I think, for example, compromises that are needed to be made by the various right-wing parties. I understand it and I appreciate it, and and it's fine. It's good. And I know how to compromise myself. But sometimes it's not just about compromising to get, the greater good done. Sometimes it's by playing a political game that includes all kinds of nasty stuff that I would never be able to do and I would never want to do. So I do not ever want to be in politics, ever. But I will always be fascinated by politics. Yes. I follow politics closely. I comment on it. I give my opinion on it. And thank God I don't owe my opinion to anybody. Okay. I can say what I want and nobody can say to me, oh, you can't say that because that's going to make so-and-so angry. And I would say, tough. And I love that. I would never be in a position where I have to give that up.
Yeah. Well, I was encouraged to hear that about Yair Lapid because I thought he was quite leftist. Because of him saying he believes in a two-state solution. But if he puts it onto the Arabs to behave, that's good, because that will never happen, will it?
Look, Yair Lapid is a talented politician. He's never been prime minister, so he's going to be prime minister. We'll see what he does. Clearly, I don't agree with him on a lot of things. Yeah. But he's not a left. He's a centrist. He's not left.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we're up to our hour. Yeah. Go on. Who?
No, I'm just going to say hi, Sondra. Marion here.
Hi, Marion. I didn't see you before. I'm great.
Yeah, you look fantastic. What do you eat for breakfast? I'll eat it myself.
Yogurt and granola. And almonds and raisins.
And, can I sincerely say Israel is very, very blessed to have you. As I've always felt, the Almighty himself has chosen well to be in the heartland of Israel. But I do second Joy's, I was going to say it before she got in first. I still think you should be the second Golda Meir. And I think every Prime Minister gets to say what they want to say whenever they want to say it anyway. So, and that way, that will be great because we can say we know the Prime Minister of Israel.
Well, how about this? You can say, I know Sondra, who knows the Prime Minister of Israel.
Yeah.
That's good enough.
Yeah, we'll probably use But, when you were finishing up, and all political matters are way over my head, I just felt this great sense of grace in your voice. And I thought, us Aussies down here who are suffering under some partly totalitarian stuff, I think we could birth a bit more mercy and grace in our own conversation. Yeah, well done.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you.
And optimism. We probably need a good dose of that at the moment, Sondra. So keep coming on. Yes.
Okay.
Nobody else?
Look forward to seeing you back in Bendigo, Sondra.
Oh, I'd love to get there.
Victoria,
All these
really
people,
enjoy having
all of
here.
you, so many of you I've seen in person in Australia. Some of you I've met when you've come here. And I miss you all. And I keep saying to Joy, I mean, Joy, of course, is our Australian representative.
Yes,
And,
a good job.
you know, she's the one who fixes up all the meetings when I come. And I always say to Joy, I've given up already. Because all along we were optimistic, it'll open. And I would say to her, Joy, as soon as Australia opens, I'm on the next plane. Just tell me. And of course, it keeps dragging on and on. So I hope at the point at which, you know, your government lets me in without having to quarantine, I'm there, you know. But
Perfect. We look forward to it.
Well, hopefully it won't be. It'll be soon.
Oh, Christian from South Africa.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for
Yes.
having me. You got any connections in South Africa, Sondra?
I've had some connections, but but nothing active. We'd love to. Are you on our mailing list?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay, so send me an email if there's something that you would like to help us get more involved in South Africa.
I work very closely with Jews for Jesus in South Africa.
Well, that's really not who we are. I'm Jewish, but I'm not Christian, and we stand for respecting one another's faith. So I do not cooperate.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Well,
so
I'm a friend
we
of
don't
his,
cooperate with Jews for Jesus because they're trying to get Jews to become Christians, and that's like a no-no, you know.
Yeah. No, we understand, but we have a passion for the Jewish people, you know, for Israel in particular.
That's wonderful. So I hope that you'll find a way to connect with us and
we'll do so.
Direct your passion to what we're doing, which is keeping Christians Christian and keeping Jews Jews, but
Jewish,
working together to what we all love, and that's God.
No, for whatever platform we come from, you know, we just admire what Israel is doing and what Israel is part of us as well.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. It's good to meet you, Christian.
Thank you. Thank you, Sondra. We're a bit after 8 o'clock up here anyway in Queensland, 9 o'clock and different times elsewhere. And I think most of you signed up to Sondra's email newsletters, but if not, do that. CFOIC.org, isn't it?
.com.
And we do have an Australian bank account for anyone that might feel led to give and support, because Sondra's just done a wonderful job of raising funds for the residents of Judea Samaria, and they're very much worthy of our support, I feel. So with that, I'll say good night and Laïtraat.
Absolutely. We will be meeting again on November 9th.
Yes.
Same time, Queensland time. Might be different times already other places.
Yeah.
Shalom. Shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Sondra, thank you, Joy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Marion.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.